historian and writer Nandita Krishnan. We'll also be joined by Callum McRae, the journalist and filmmaker who released these images today, and by Colonel Anil Kaul, who was injured in Sri Lanka in the IPKF operations. Let me start with you, Subramanian Swamy. Last year, before India actually took the decision to vote against Sri Lanka, you kept warning that this was going to be a fatal mistake, that tomorrow this was going to boomerang, the world would then turn around and interfere in states like Jammu and Kashmir, question our human rights record. Now you have these pictures that have emerged. You weren't very convinced of the charge made by Channel 4 last year. Yeah. These pictures actually show that Prabhakaran's son, a 12-year-old child, has been captured alive. Does it change your mind at all about the import of what we're discussing?
No, I don't know what these pictures really show, because there's no authentication. Where did they get it from? And what is the time sequence? There's no way to date it. So and Channel 4 is not a channel on which I would stake my arguments or even my credibility.
Let's assume this has happened. That this
why should I assume it has happened? I know that Prabhakaran had got his son also into the fighting. He was given a gun, he was shooting. We don't know whether there was an ambush in which they were all, or the entire family got killed. I would rather go by the UN report, which had placed equal
responsibility on both sides.
Both sides. Unfortunately, the propaganda which is fueled by the LTTE money, drug money that is still floating around, is totally concentrated on that. And it's got nothing to do with Tamil ethnicity, because Sinhalese and Tamils are the same people. Sinhalese came from Orissa and Bihar, and Tamils came from Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So therefore, this whole issue that is being generated as if this is something which is against India. In fact, LTTE was an anti-Indian organization, and we've got to keep that in mind, and we have to ensure that Sri Lanka doesn't feel isolated, because there are so many other countries which are willing to help Sri Lanka, and they are not they are inimical to us. So let us use our sense and
so obviously your reference there is to China, but
yes, China, Pakistan.
Yeah, Masakesi Singh, Dr. Swamy quotes the UN panel report, and I have a bit of it in front of me, and it actually says that there are credible allegations which, if proven, indicate that a wide range of serious violations of international humanitarian law and international rights law was committed both by the government of Sri Lanka and the LTTE. Now, but in the narrative and in the vote that eventually took place at the United Nations Human Rights Council, where India surprised everybody by voting against Sri Lanka, when many people thought India would just abstain, and this vote may happen again, and the Americans are pushing for it. Now, if there is responsibility on both sides, do these new images released by Channel 4, which Dr. Swamy says you can't necessarily believe Channel 4, do they change anything?
Two, three things. Firstly, this killing took place in 2009.
Yes.
Actually, now that I look at the pictures, if you see, the trousers are the same. In both the pictures, he's wearing the brown and black trousers.
Yeah.
So one of the clothing is the same, unless he only had one kind of pant, which he was wearing time and again.
Channel 4 says that
battle fatigues.
Or battle fatigues. You actually think a 12-year-old child was a child
there
soldier?
There are photographs I can produce where the guy is holding a gun with the battle fatigue.
Now the second point is that if this happened in 2009, I think there was a conspiracy of silence in India at that stage. DMK didn't want to make noise. The elections had not taken place in Tamil Nadu. Everybody was on board, and the central government, understandably, because you wanted the killers of Rajiv Gandhi to be punished, so everybody was on board. For 2 years we remained on board, but where it went wrong was that the President of Sri Lanka did not accommodate the aspirations of Tamils in Sri Lanka. Once we did not vote against Sri Lanka when it came up early, I think in 2010 or something. We did not go against them. Now, if time and again we find he is going in a certain direction, he is building a family clique which is very authoritarian, democracy is being banished, now even the Chief Justice has been...
so you're saying it's what happened after the war was over that is more relevant than what happened during it?
Yeah, now therefore we are now trying to find some leverage in putting some pressure on Sri Lanka. Old leverage used to be LTTE, now there is no LTTE left. So the only leverage you have is you will have to go to the international organization and play that against the Sri Lankan government and hope that Sri Lankan government has better sense than simply visiting India for a pilgrimage and then going back and not doing anything for the Tamils.
Before I take this to D. Raja, Subramanian Swamy, you've seen Jayalalitha's government saying that pilots who come from Sri Lanka here for training should be sent back. Sports people who come should be sent back. And almost all or a number of the mainline Tamil parties seem united on this. How is this going to unfold given these new images now?
Well, that's a foolish thing. You know, I think that is they're playing to the gallery in a very childish way, in my opinion. In fact, even on Rajiv Gandhi's killers, they passed a resolution saying keeping Tamil sentiments in view, they should not be hanged. It's a very strange thing to say. Your former Prime Minister was assassinated by them. So what I would say is that, see, he has a point. I must say, one of the unresolved questions which I myself have in my speeches to the Sri Lankan military in Colombo have said is the question of sharing power with the Tamils and the Tamils feeling secure. And I'm not saying that they should give them autonomy or give them at least the kind of arrangement we have in India, or some modification of that they can have. That is an unresolved question, and I do think that the Sri Lankan government ought to do it. But the way to do it is to win their confidence as a country and then go about it, because they've got a lot of other countries telling them, don't listen to India.
So you're saying there are things that could be improved in the sharing of power, in the federal structure that is being established in Sri Lanka, but these images of Prabhakaran Sana neither here or there. D. Raja, when this exact controversy erupted last year, I remember you were on a program with Dr. Swamy. You were saying India must push against Sri Lanka in that vote. That vote may well happen again if the Americans get their way. D. Raja, you've never been known, your party's never been known to support the Americans. Now you see these new images. What's the position that you're going to take now?
This is not the question of supporting American sponsored resolution or not. It is the question of fighting or demanding justice to the Tamils in Sri Lanka. I do not want Mr. Swamy to speak on behalf of Tamil people, whether he understands the Tamil problems, whether he understands the feelings of Tamil people, it is a different issue. I want him to speak as a human being. What happened in Sri Lanka in the year 2009? How many thousands of people were killed, massacred by Sri Lankan army? Let him answer to this. Now LTTE stands banned and there is no LTTE. LTTE infrastructure, everything was broken. Now what is the issue? The issue is Sri Lankan government, how it deals with the problems. If I use the terms in Asia, particularly in South Asia, Sri Lankan government can be termed as a rogue state, as a terror state.
You're calling Sri Lanka a rogue state? One minute. Are you saying this with responsibility, Mr. Raja? One minute. You're calling Sri Lanka a rogue state? A rogue state? A rogue state?
Definitely, otherwise how it can wage a war on its own citizens, the Tamil nationality. What they were asking equal coexistence in Sri Lanka, but the army was engaged in a full-scale war against Tamil people, and Tamil people were massacred in thousands. As human beings, are we not responsible?
Okay, let me just get Dr. Swamy in there for a second.
Justice.
D. Raja, you've made your point. You're saying to Subramanian Swamy, speak as a human being. Don't speak as a politician, don't speak as a Tamilian, speak as a human being. And Subramanian Swamy, that is the question for you tonight. That irrespective of where we stand on the LTTE, there are rules of war, and those rules of war mean that a 12-year-old child, in fact nobody should get killed in custody, but a 12-year-old child.
Well, first of all, it's very heartening to see a communist giving me a lecture about human rights, considering that in communist countries there's no such thing as human rights. But let me have my say, Mr. Raja. Let me have my say. You have no right to speak about human rights, given your ideology. But what I would say is that if there has been any human rights violation after the war was over, after Prabhakaran was killed, then I would like to that to be brought to my attention. They are playing the same old broken record.
No, hang on. You're saying what happens during a war is not relevant?
There
is a Geneva Convention. There are rules of war. The question
in the war was that, as the UN said, both sides were engaging in human rights violations, and in a war this is bound to happen. We are accused of it in Nagaland, we are accused of it in Manipur, we are accused of it in Kashmir. We can't help it. If there is an insurgency, they're going to be that. Question is, after the war, can you give me any instance of any human rights violation? The answer is no.
Let me take this to Callum McRae, the journalist and filmmaker who actually directed this film in which these new images have emerged of Prabhakaran's 12-year-old child. That's what Channel 4 claims. And let's take this to him first, and let's just bring up those two sets of images again. Channel 4 claiming that Prabhakaran's 12-year-old child was actually taken alive. He was taken into custody alive. There's even a picture of him eating a snack. Callum McRae, if you can come in here. We have Dr. Subramanian Swamy making the point that A, these pictures don't necessarily prove anything. We do not know the timeline. And B, that Prabhakaran was known to use children as child soldiers, including his own child. We're playing right now the two pictures of a killed child. We've obviously blurred that image, and there's the child caught alive. Callum McRae, what would be your counter to that the LTTE used civilians as shields? That's what the UN panel says as well. It says that both the government of Sri Lanka and the LTTE were guilty of very serious allegations and of violating a law, and it also says that the LTTE used 330,000 civilians as human shields. So the question being asked here is, why does your film focus only on this child? How do we know what the LTTE was doing or not doing in terms of putting civilians and children into harm's way?
The incident with the child, Balachandran Prabhakaran, actually takes up about a minute and a half in a film which is an hour and a half long. Secondly, dealing with the reality and the actuality of it, we have had these photographs examined. Nobody who's trying to fake photographs fakes two photographs of a similar incident, because immediately you can detect changes. Nobody tries to reproduce a situation which has also been videoed. So, but leaving that aside, we've had these images analysed very carefully by a forensic scientist. They are accurate, they haven't been manipulated. I'm afraid the reality is that this is what happened, that he was held in a calm, quiet situation, not in a battle situation, not by maverick paramilitaries, but in a calm situation. He was given a snack, he was then coldly taken away and killed. And I'm afraid that what that illustrates is yet more evidence. It's not the evidence on its own, it's yet more evidence of a situation in which there appears to have been a systematic policy of executing prisoners, senior Tiger personnel, and even the children of Tiger personnel. He was a 12-year-old child. Nobody in war is allowed to be executed after they've been captured. Prisoners cannot be executed.
Okay.
To execute a 12-year-old in such cold blood is particularly disturbing. But to come back to the issue of where this leaves us and what should happen next, the problem is that the LTTE, which we make absolutely clear, were a very vicious and brutal army, guilty of war crimes, using suicide bombers, using child soldiers. I'm really, I get a bit bored with being told that somehow we're defending the LTTE. We're doing no such thing. But the point is that the Sri Lankan government, a democratically elected government, which claims to adhere to international humanitarian law, cannot hide behind the crimes of the LTTE. One crime does not justify another. This is a government which the UN found, after investigation, was responsible for killing most of the people in the no-fire zones, which they had encouraged the civilians to go into.
Okay, let me just interrupt you there and get KC Singh and Subramanian Swamy to respond. Then we'll go across to Nandita Krishna and Colonel Anil Kaul. KC Singh, to you first. This is the filmmaker, you're hearing it from him. He's saying, I'm not an LTTE apologist, but he doesn't agree with the argument being put forth by Dr. Swamy that what happens during a conflict is not relevant, it's what happens after a conflict.
Barka, India has to take a call. The call is that, would you be consistent in your support for this? Till now, I think it's unfortunate that because of an internal crisis in a number of states, we've become very defensive. What if the same rule is applied to us? I think we have to go beyond it now. Now, of course, what will happen will be that in Sri Lanka, you'll take one stand. In Syria, you'll take another stand. In Libya, you'll take another stand.
Yeah.
Now, that can't be there. If India has to be the voice of sanity, relatable to India's past, going back to Buddha, Ashoka, Gandhiji and so on and so forth, then you must be consistent. Of
so you're saying our own, the fear that our own human rights record could be questioned in JNK, in the Northeast. This has always
been a factor, and I think we only raised it with Sri Lanka when we found Sri Lankan government is no longer responding to us. That's why nobody raised it in 2009, nobody raised it in 2010. You start raising it as an instrument of state policy.
Dr. Swamy,
you're not raising it per se.
I got you.
As a principle.
Dr. Swamy, why be defensive? If we are indeed the world's largest democracy, we should be a player on the international stage, we should be taking positions. Of course, foreign policy is part pragmatism, I do not dispute that. But the fact of the matter is that KC Singh says our reason to not get into this debate cannot be our own defensiveness about our own records in insurgency zones.
Well, see, the mover of this resolution is the United States. So what are they doing with the drones in Afghanistan and borders of Pakistan?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't talk about that. What happened in Vietnam? We don't talk about that. The fact is that when you are faced in this kind of situation, you got to have a view. They put an atom bomb or 2 atom bombs in Japan. Those were civilians. They killed them all. We don't talk about that because that was a situation of war. I would say the important question our ambassador has raised here is, can we make Sri Lanka give some devolution of power to the Tamils?
Yeah.
And therefore the question is, what's the most efficacious way of doing it? He says this is the way to do it, through the UN. Now that's not going to work, because there the large number of countries inimical to India are helping Sri Lanka to say to hell with India. We have to use our links with Sri Lanka, our cultural links with Sri Lanka, our proximity to Sri Lanka, to make them come around. We have to keep on doing it, and that's the only way to do it.
So don't go voting against Sri Lanka at international fora.
No voting against Sri Lanka.
Nandita Krishna, a historian and writer joining us from Chennai tonight. This is a very volatile and emotive issue for the people of Tamil Nadu. But then Subramanian Swamy also raises the point that, look, this was a terrorist outfit that killed an Indian Prime Minister.
Barkha, it is true that LTTE did a lot of terrorist activities, but you know, one wrong doesn't justify another right. This is a government which has signed the Geneva Convention and so on. And if that child was a prisoner of war, he should have been treated as one and not shot in cold blood. This is not done. It's totally unacceptable. And India has to take it up. I mean, if India doesn't support the Tamils, who will? When the Gujaratis were thrown out of Uganda, India had to support them. Tomorrow if something happens to the Punjabis in Canada, of course India has to go to support them. I mean, these are also our people. I think India has to support the Tamils if it means vote against it, because what has happened is totally unacceptable. And I mean, if we are going to be accused of something similar in India, well, we should look at ourselves and not do similar things. I was in Sri Lanka a few months ago. The Tamils are demoralized, they are dispirited, they are an invisible people. I mean, there is no flowering of Tamil culture there any longer. And I'm talking about intellectuals, historians, people like that. So if they are in that condition, how will the common Tamil be in Sri Lanka?
Let me take this to, I'll come back to Subramanian Swamy. Let me just take this to Colonel Anil Kaul. He was part of the IPKF operations and in fact was injured in those operations, author then of a book called Better Dead Than Disabled. Colonel Kaul, as somebody who's been a soldier, you know that there are rules of war. You know that there is a Geneva Convention. We also all know that these rules are sometimes flouted by many parties, that people who do not see conflict cannot assume or afford to maybe sit in judgment or easy judgment or oversimplified judgment on it. Well, Colonel Kaul, as you see these images today of a 12-year-old child eating food and 2 hours later found dead, and the allegation being that he was shot in cold blood, do you believe that a child, even that a child of a terrorist, deserves that?
Barkha, your last point, well taken. A child should not be in that situation at all. But having been there, having been in it, having seen it from very close quarters, and the resultant injury that you see, you've seen earlier also, thanks to the LTTE, who did not spare any efforts to bring this kind of injury on their own people. I have seen with my own one eye or 2 eyes at that time, human shields being put forward, and they were Tamils. Weren't they somebody's children? So now that Mr. Prabhakaran's child is in this state, why are we all talking about it? They have killed their own people.
Yes.
They were ruthless.
That doesn't justify justify
Now
the,
coming back to all,
Sri Lankan
no,
army
before I, let me finish.
Yeah, one minute, Mr. Raja.
Before we go any further, why are we talking about Canada and Uganda and Sri Lanka? What about my Kashmiri Pandit brethren in Kashmir who have been killed? Same kind of children were killed there also by the militants. Same kind of intellectuals. Did any of these gentlemen and ladies
Okay, but
raise a voice?
Colonel Cole, well, your point.
Did they raise a voice?
Sir, you have seen the conflict and none of us around this table have fought in a war. So obviously you come from one experience which has to be heard and respected. But Nandita Krishna, you're making the point that what the LTTE did does not mean the Sri Lankan government should do the same. Is that what you're saying?
See, Barkha, LTTE was a terrorist organization. And you know what terrorist organizations do anywhere in the world.
Yes.
But does that mean an army of a democratically elected country does the same thing? I mean, then what is the difference between a terrorist and an army? There has to be a difference, and that is the difference. Okay, I mean, go to war against the terrorists, take them as prisoners. But a 12-year-old child, he's a child, even if he is used as a human shield, take him away, give him a normal life, let him grow up like all children grow up.
Yeah,
Even if he was used by his father,
all easier said than done. You weren't there at that time.
Yeah. Callum McRae,
you weren't there on ground at that time. You would have seen the situation.
1 minute. I just want to get a last word in from Callum. Callum, a last word to you. As you can see, this triggers very intense emotions in India, in the region. The point being made is that filmmakers, journalists, human rights activists never make it a lead story, never make it a primetime discussion when the LTTE is guilty of awful atrocities. Just a quick comment from you on that as we continue this debate.
I mean, if you look at the film, we absolutely deal with that, and we say that the LTTE, I repeat my previous point, the Sri Lankan government cannot hide behind the crimes of the LTTE. The other point I'd like to make very briefly is that I have made a lot of films about the Americans and the British war crimes, the allegations of war crimes in Iraq. That has been my main focus. I make films about anybody. The suggestion that I'm pursuing some kind of Western agenda is absurd. Finally, I think the problem that you were dealing with earlier about what India should do, and why India has a role to play here, is that Sri Lanka has shown, of course Sri Lanka should deal with this and should find justice on its own, but the Rajapaksa regime has demonstrated it is neither capable nor willing of doing so. The LLRC did not even address the issues of war crimes. What it did say was that they need to do something about the disappeared, they need to cut down on defence involvement in civil administration. All of those recommendations have been ignored. Defence spending has gone up 25% in the last year. So the government, but finally of course, a government which is going to investigate itself, or a country, has to have a system of justice, a judiciary which is independent from the executive. That is no longer the case because the Rajapaksa regime have attacked judges, have got rid of the Chief Justice. In a situation where the country has shown, a state has shown it cannot deal with this itself, then you have to come back to what the UN decided unanimously, including India and everybody else voted, that the UN has a responsibility, the international community has a responsibility to protect.
That takes us back to what we're discussing, Callum. Thanks very much. D. Raja, let's come in there. Here's the difference. There are those who think India should get involved. There are those like Subramanian Swamy who are arguing that use your good offices with Sri Lanka. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Raja.
Nobody is justifying what LTT did.
Yes.
Nobody can justify what IPKF did in Sri Lanka. It is not the issue before us for debate. The debate is whether we demand an impartial international investigation into war crimes and human rights violations. How to bring justice to the people of Tamil origin or Tamils in Sri Lanka. What international community can do. And yes, it was an American sponsored resolution last time. In fact, I wanted my own country, India, to move the resolution. I spoke in Parliament. It was India which should have moved the resolution. But India did not do that because India was also in collaboration with war against the Tamils in Sri Lanka.
Why do you say that? India voted against Sri Lanka in the resolution. Isn't that too much of a conspiracy theory? Dr. D. Raja.
No, no, I am not doing any
did you raise the issue
I'm
of
not
the
doing
Kashmiri
that.
Pandits?
What I am saying,
One
the
minute.
Did you
struggle
raise
of
as an Indian,
Sri
as an
Lankan
Indian,
Tamils
as an Indian,
are
did you
struggle-
raise the
Eight
issue of
minutes.
Kashmiri
One
Pandits?
minute,
Sri Lankan
one minute,
Tamils
one
did
minute.
not, the struggle of Sri Lankan Tamils did not start with LTTE.
Okay.
The struggle of Tamils in Sri Lanka began in 40s with
Here's the
Selvanayaka,
question. Here's the
the
question we're
Gandhi of
confronted with as a
Jaffna.
country. One
at
minute.
the
I mean, you have to see the
forefront.
history of this problem.
1 minute, Nandita and Colonel Kaul. Here's the question. I'm coming to both of you in a second. Subramanian Swamy, here's the dilemma. And I think AC Singh raises an important point. Does India have a consistent position on when to step in and take a position on what could be called another country's internal affairs? For example, we have, as he said, in the Arab world, taken different positions for different countries. When it comes to Burma or Myanmar, whatever you want to call it, we haven't taken a consistent position. Can we really afford to be taking a position on Sri Lanka? Human rights activists widely applauded what India did last year. Could we afford, if this resolution were to come again, to do the same this year?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't worry about what human rights groups say.
Why shouldn't we?
I'll tell you, we have
accountable for human rights.
We are a democratic country, we have national interests too. And I want to say one thing first to Ms. Nandita Krishnan. We are Indians first and Tamils afterwards. Secondly, the Sinhalese are also Indians. They came from Bihar and Orissa. So therefore don't make it an issue. We Tamils, who will speak for Tamils? Who will speak for the Sinhalese? We have to look at the Indian national interests. We have to consider ourselves as Indians first and Tamils afterwards. And if there is a conflict, Indian interests will triumph. I would say our government has been ineffective in pursuing the Sri Lankan government to ensure that the Tamils are now brought into the mainstream, which the LTT pushed them out of. LTT killed all the democratic leaders of Tamils. Amritangalingam, Yogeshwaran, Nilanda Tirchalvam, all the Tamil leaders were killed. Anyone who, even militants he killed who were not ready to follow him. So therefore, we have to start from scratch there, and the leadership of the Tamils accepted the Sri Lankan army chief as their candidate for president, Mr. Fonseca. Now, do you mean to say this person was killed by Rajapaksa? He was killed by Mr. Fonseca.
D. Raja, coming to you in a second. Ambassador K.C. Singh, here's the point. It is disingenuous.
I am telling you.
Yes. Okay, go ahead. Mr. Raja, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
I said on the floor of Indian Parliament, if Singalas would have been in minority, if they would have faced such a situation, I would be the first person to speak for Singhala people. That's what I said in Parliament. It is not the question of Tamil people and Singhala people. It is the question of Tamil people versus the Sri Lankan government, Sri Lankan state. That is what we have to debate.
And therefore, now, I am coming to this question. Mr. Raja, should we be getting involved with another country?
India should vote against
I would
Sri
like
Lanka.
to ask Mr. Raja a simple question.
Its policy towards
Okay, Colonel Kaul has a question. Mr. Raja, Colonel Kaul has a question for you. Colonel Kaul, go ahead. We are discussing right now when India should get involved on an international forum. In matters that relate to another country.
Exactly. The point is, we are discussing whether we should get involved in an international forum in another country.
Yes.
Look into your own, apne gireban mein jhank ke dekhiye. Mr. Raja, have you raised the point of Kashmiri Pandits in Parliament? Aren't we Indians?
I raised. Yes, I raised.
Look at us.
Yes.
Look at us.
We should
I raised.
What have you done about it? What have you done about it?
Pandits.
Forget about Sri Lanka.
We should raise the
What
issue
have you
of
done about
Kashmiri
it?
Pandits, of course.
Okay, 1 minute.
We should.
No, you have not.
Take
Not
up their
adequate.
cause.
What have you done?
Okay, 1 minute,
What have
Colonel
you done?
Kaul.
Forget
1
about
minute, 1 minute.
international forum.
1 minute. Whether
I'm
it's
sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Colonel Kaul got your
sorry,
point.
international forums come.
Got your
First
point.
you look at tomorrow the same thing will happen with Maoists. What are we talking about?
Okay.
International forum. Pehla apne ghar mein jhaan ke dekho.
Ji, got your point. K.C. Singh, here's the question. Nandita, give me a second.
Forum.
Nandita, give me a second. I'm
Somebody
coming to you.
has to take care of the Tamils.
Okay, 1 minute. Here's the thing. Every ethnicity, community, state, politics comes from its own perspective. It is disingenuous to say that we do not get involved. India is involved in Afghanistan because it is considered vital to national interest to be involved in Afghanistan. We make these decisions based on national interest. Some people may think we should make them on abstract principles. Foreign policy, sadly or not, doesn't work like that. Is Sri Lanka a case where India should get involved?
I think it is. Your immediate periphery has always been an important area for you. We supported King Tribhuvan in 1950-51.
Yeah.
We intervened in Nepal.
Yes.
71, we intervened to create Bangladesh.
Yes.
We annexed Sikkim. We went into Maldives when there was an attack on Maldives in 88. So we have gone there. IPKF went wrong. I'm sorry for Colonel, but IPKF was one of those interventions which went wrong. We were caught between two adversaries.
The colonel was not responsible, it was a political decision.
Yeah, fine. Correct.
And
Okay.
it was a decision by one of your ilk, who was the High Commissioner in Colombo.
Well, your ilk also, General Sundarji was involved. Anyway, let's not get into the
Okay,
ilk.
1 minute.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
not...
Many ilks involved. But it was a collective
minor
decision.
fault. So,
Now
sorry.
the question is, in
Yeah,
immediate
wait,
periphery,
Colonel Call, let him
Colonel Call has got nothing to do
Colonel
with it.
Call, let him speak. I'll give you a chance to rebut.
we have a situation developing in Maldives today. You'll have to take a position. A former president is sitting in your High Commission.
Yes.
You have a situation in Sri Lanka where the president is refusing to acknowledge that he had a great opportunity to be a statesman.
Yes.
He is refusing to be a statesman. He is being a Napoleon. Now, everywhere, when it is your immediate periphery, I call it the island chain. In the island chain, we have to intervene. We must go in and use every power of national...
So what should India do? Last comment from everybody
You use United Nations, you use direct principles of trade and other pressures, or whatever it requires. This has to be settled, because anything that happens there to Tamils has an implication domestically for India, and we don't want any other foreign power, China or whatever else, sucked into that country. This has to be made clear to that country.
Okay, Colonel Call, very briefly, I come back to the rules of war. Do you believe that if rules of war are violated by any party, because that's what the United Nations said, that both the government of Sri Lanka and LTTE were guilty, that has to be condemned, justice has to be served in those cases? Do you accept that, Colonel Call?
I agree that the rules of war are the first ones to be broken.
Yes. Yes.
In conflict. There is no doubt about that. Now, it depends on who the victor is to enforce his directions. The Americans and the allies forced their directions of war crimes on the Nazis after World War II. They repeated it in Bosnia.
Okay.
It's a normal fact of life. However, to rebut Mr. K.C. Singh as to getting involved all around the Indian Ocean chain, okay, fine, that's part of your diplomacy. But to blame the army, we do what we are ordered to do. In the Maldives, it was the para brigade which was sent there. In Sri Lanka, IPKF was sent there.
Yeah.
We just do what we are ordered to do.
Yeah, fair enough.
So
Fair
to
enough.
say that I'm sorry, Colonel Call has got nothing to do with it. It is the diplomats who fail and then get the army to do their dirty
Casey, you want
work.
to come in there briefly?
Colonel, it was neither diplomats nor army. It was the political leadership of that point. The decisions in a democratic country are taken by the Prime Minister.
Was the IPKF
No,
a
it
mistake?
is not. There was raw there.
You don't think it was a mistake?
It was not a mistake. The IPK was made to fight with one arm tied behind its back.
Casey,
They were not allowed to do what they wanted to do.
But you're saying
exactly.
the decision to go in
This is what happened to my
I'm
arm,
saying
which was
when
tied
you
behind the
went
back.
in, the two adversaries did not stand by the peace accord that you worked out.
Yeah.
And in fact, Rajiv Gandhi lost his life because of it, because the LTTE turned against him. So it was therefore an unsuccessful. It could have worked. It didn't work. That's a different issue.
Okay, Nandita, last comment from you. What do you expect your country to do? And tomorrow if somebody turns around and says in Jammu and Kashmir, in the northeast, maybe even in the fact that there are allegations that our executions are not conducted in this country with transparency, tomorrow somebody will move a resolution against us.
Barkha, the fact is that only India can bring peace into Sri Lanka. Only India can make the Sinhalese and the Tamils live and work together. We have to make that effort. It has to be done. We cannot shy away from it. Whether it means we have quiet diplomacy behind the scenes, or we have to vote against Sri Lanka in an international forum to press them, because the fact is it's the entire Rajapakse family, not just the president. They have taken over and the whole of Sri Lanka. I mean, this is not correct.
Okay,
and you have to go there to see the condition of the Tamils.
You rectify India, which has also been taken over by a family.
Okay, D. Raja,
well, let's...
Swamy, every
Yes.
political
Well,
party.
I agree. It should not happen in
every
India
political
either.
party.
It should not happen in India
but,
either. We should not have one family,
It's
but
across-
in Sri
Okay,
Lanka,
D. Raja, let's come back on point.
Great.
D. Raja, what do you
Order.
expect your
Yes.
country to do? What do you expect the government to do?
No,
Do these new
India-
images change anything? Very quickly, sir. Then last word to Subramanian Swamy and we end. Yes. D. Raja, go ahead.
India is the immediate neighbor.
Yes.
India knows fully well what happened in Sri Lanka, what is happening in Sri Lanka. In 2009 and before, it was genocide. Now what is happening is structural genocide. All Tamil symbols are being destroyed. Tamil culture is being destroyed. Tamil demographic composition is destroyed, and it is structural genocide. In such a situation, I think international community has a responsibility to demand an international investigation into war crimes and human rights violations.
Okay,
And
Subramanian
justice
Swamy,
must
very
be
quickly.
established.
Mr. Raja, would
One
you
minute,
like to
I've got to
dedicate
end.
that
Colonel Call,
much?
hang on.
No, J&K.
India,
Colonel Call, hang on now.
J&K, Mr. Raja,
Mr. Raja,
J&K.
Colonel Call, hang on.
India should take
Just
up
see
this
the
issue
symbolism.
in the
1 minute,
United
sir.
Nations Forum.
Mr. Raja, I've got to
If
end.
it is
Very quickly.
necessary,
Just symbolism.
India should vote against
You see
like
the
Sri Lanka.
symbolism.
Yeah, got that. Got that.
You see the symbolism of the president of Sri Lanka coming here to Tirupati to pray. He's a Buddhist and he's praying before a Hindu god. He has done that in Guruvayur. There is such bondage between the two people. We should try to explore those whom the Sri Lankans from India are whom the Sri Lankans are willing to accept from
But do you
India.
accept the Sri Lankan government has failed to assimilate the
I
sentiments and the
totally
rights of the
agree
Tamil
that
people?
the Sri Lankan have an unresolved question which they are not taking with the urgency which they should. I have been saying that to them. I'm saying it here too. The Tamils have to be brought back onto the mainstream, which Mr. Prabhakaran pushed them out of.
Well, it's a volatile debate. There might be another international vote. We'll have